You have encountered this person. They do not argue. It's not in the way most people argue, with volume, with insistence, with the visible investment of someone who needs to be right badly enough to fight for it. They listen. They nod. They acknowledge your position with a generosity that feels almost disarming. They may even concede small points, graciously, without apparent cost. And then, somehow, the outcome reflects their position entirely, not through force, not through the kind of visible maneuvering that would allow you to point at a specific moment and say, "There, that is where it changed." The conversation ends, the decision lands, the situation resolves, and you are left with the specific, disorienting experience of having lost something you were never aware was being contested. Machiavelli did not invent this person. He simply understood them better than anyone before or since. And what he understood with the cold architectural precision that has made The Prince one of the most studied and most misread texts in history was that argument is almost never the most effective route to a desired outcome. It's that the person who wins by never appearing to fight has not abandoned the contest. They have simply learned to run it at a level their opponents cannot see. Machiavelli's understanding of conflict was fundamentally strategic rather than emotional, where most people experience disagreement as a contest of correctness, a battle between competing positions where the superior argument should, in theory, prevail. Machiavelli understood it as a contest of positioning, of psychological real estate, of the careful management of how each party in the exchange perceives themselves, perceives the other, and perceives the cost of various outcomes. In this framework, the person who argues loudly and insistently has already made a strategic error. They have revealed the depth of their investment. Thou made their desired outcome visible. Thou have activated the other person's resistance by making them feel that capitulation would mean defeat, and human beings will accept worse outcomes rather than experience the psychological cost of visible defeat. The person who never argues has understood something the loud arguer has not, that resistance is generated by pressure, that the more visibly you push toward an outcome, the more psychological energy the other person redirects toward resisting it, regardless of whether the outcome itself serves them. Remove the visible pressure and the resistance has nothing to organize around. This is the first principle, and it is the foundation of everything that follows. The person who never argues but always wins is running a specific operational sequence, one that Machiavelli's principles illuminate, with remarkable precision when applied to interpersonal rather than purely political dynamics. The first movement is genuine listening, not the performed listening of someone waiting for their turn to speak, but the operational listening of someone extracting information. They are identifying the other person's actual priorities beneath their stated position. The emotional investment underneath the logical argument is the specific fear or need that is driving the resistance, because the stated position is almost never the real position. And the person who locates the real position has found the actual lever. The second movement is strategic agreement. They find the elements of your position they can genuinely endorse, and they endorse them completely, visibly, without apparent reservation. This does two things simultaneously. Disarms your resistance by removing the adversarial frame, and it creates a psychological debt, the subtle social obligation that follows when someone has been generous with you and you have not yet reciprocated. The third movement is reframing, having agreed with the parts of your position that cost them nothing. They introduce their own position, not as a contradiction of yours, but as a natural extension of it, as the logical next step from the ground you have already agreed on together. Your position becomes the foundation of their conclusion, and because you laid the foundation, the conclusion feels partly yours. The fourth movement is patience. They do not need the outcome today. Okay? They are comfortable allowing the reframe to settle, to become the shared understanding of the situation rather than a contested claim. They will return to it. They will reference it as established ground. And each time they do, it becomes slightly more established, until the outcome they wanted from the beginning has become the outcome everyone remembers agreeing on. What makes this operational sequence so effective is that it works with human psychology rather than against it. Machiavelli understood, centuries before the behavioral sciences confirmed it, that people are not moved by the best argument. They are moved by the argument that allows them to maintain their self-image while changing their position. That makes compliance feel like choice. That makes influence feel like agreement. The loud arguer asks you to admit you were wrong. The person who never argues never puts you in that position. They find a path to their desired outcome that allows you to arrive there feeling right, feeling heard, feeling generous, feeling like a participant in a shared conclusion rather than the loser of a contest. This is not kindness, it is precision. Machiavelli was explicit that the prince who relied on force alone was always vulnerable, because force generates resentment. Resentment generates resistance, and resistance eventually generates the kind of opposition that force cannot permanently suppress. It's the prince who moved people through their own psychology, who made compliance feel like wisdom and agreement feel like self-interest, built something force could never construct: durability. The willing participation of the people being influenced in the outcomes the influencer had already decided on. The recognition that this pattern produces is specific and retrospective. It arrives not in the moment of the conversation where everything feels collegial, reasonable, mutually arrived at, but afterward, in the quiet assessment of how a situation resolved, in the specific dissonance between the memory of a conversation that felt collaborative and the outcome that serves one party entirely. That dissonance is the pattern making itself visible. Once you can feel it, you can begin to work with it consciously, both in recognizing when it is being run on you, and in understanding the principles beneath it well enough to stop generating unnecessary resistance in your own interactions. Because Machiavelli's insight was never really about manipulation in the crude sense. It was about the architecture of influence, the understanding that how you pursue an outcome determines whether the outcome holds. That the person who wins through visible force has won a battle. That the person who wins through the other person's willing participation has won something structural, something that doesn't require maintenance, something that doesn't generate resentment, something built not on the suppression of resistance but on the absence of it. The person who never argues is not avoiding conflict, they have simply learned to resolve it before it becomes visible. And now, so have you. If you found this video useful, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for visiting the underground. Till next time.